Do we stump the trunk or do we just talk about concerts? Eddie Trunk is our guest on a really, really cool episode of the Music Universe podcast.
Well, Matt, this was one of the best interviews I think we've ever had.
This was fun. This was just awesome. Eddie Trunk, one of the most well-known rock and roll heavy metal broadcasters in the country. You'll hear him say he does 8 shows a week. That's more shows than there are days in the week, people. He's just fantastic. And we talked about everything from his career to the coronavirus pandemic to 9/11. I listen to him. You listen to him a lot. I listen to him when I can. We're both fans. We wanted to have him, and he said yes. And it was just felt like 3 guys talking. It was just awesome.
Yeah, it was such a blast. And, there were other questions we wanted to get to, but we always try to respect their time. He's very busy, and super glad that he was able to fit us in and that he was willing to come on this show. And, the episode really speaks for itself. And I think we just need to get down to it.
Real quick before we do start, the episode references our conversation with Rick Allen, the drummer for Def Leppard. So if you haven't checked that out, we'll have that link below, however we want to do that. Check that out either before or after this. You don't really need to know too much about it, but we talk a little bit about our conversation with Rick. And now here's our conversation with Eddie. Eddie Trunk, national talk show host. I mean, my goodness, sir, reading your bio and knowing what I know about you, do you ever get any time away from the microphone? It seems like you are always working, always out there, keeping everybody informed of what's going on in the music world.
Well, Matt, I mean, times I do. And I mean, I don't ever like to complain about working too much, because I'm so lucky that I've had the career I've had and continue to have. So I don't want to be that guy that complains about it. But yeah, it can be a pretty relentless schedule. I mean, for depending upon how people connect with me, they may only hear me a couple hours a day on the radio if they listen to my daily show on Sirius XM and be like, he just does 2 hours a day. But there's so much more that goes into it, both before and after that. And I manage and deal with a lot of other things that are aspects of my career that often I'm not shutting it down until maybe 10 o'clock at night. The West Coast is still open till 6 or 7. So I'm usually dealing with stuff until around 9 or 10 every night. And then by around that time, I usually try to at least get my eyes off the phone and the texts and the emails and just watch some TV and wind down.
Yeah, and I know that a few years ago you were hosting at least 3 weekly daily shows. That's kind of, I know you host Volume every day. I was listening right before we actually got on here. Great material, as always, an advocate for rock and roll. Are you still up to 3 weekly now with Hair Nation and your terrestrial one?
Well, if you count them as separate things, yeah. But the amount of shows I do every week total right now would actually be 8, because I do 6 live. Monday through Friday, I'm live on Volume from 2 to 4 Eastern. And that's a rock talk show for people that don't know on Channel 106. So there's that. Mm-hmm. And then I do an extra show Mondays, only Mondays from 5 to 8 Eastern on Hair Nation, which is a mix of music and talk. And that's also live. So that's 6 shows a week for Sirius XM live. And then I have that, what really started it all for me is a radio show back in '83, right out of high school. That's a syndicated show. So I produce that every week still, and that's pre-recorded, so that I produce the tape. And then the 8th thing would be a podcast, which is really a repurpose of one of my radio interviews. I started doing a podcast about 7-8 years ago, but at that time I was not doing a daily show on Sirius XM, and it didn't really make a lot of sense for me to interview somebody twice over for the same thing, just for different platforms. So I asked Sirius XM if they'd be cool with letting me repurpose one of the interviews after it aired there live, and we reached that agreement. So it's really, the podcast is really there for people that don't get Sirius or XM, that can get a taste of what I do every day. And it's also for people outside of the US or Canada who can't get Sirius or XM. And it just is another way to give the interviews another platform, another life, and more reach. And very recently, as of about a week ago, I ended up bringing the podcast under the Sirius XM umbrella. So it's actually not produced by them, which gives it even more of a marketing push. It's still free on all the platforms, but it's now in-house with them, which is a big help in terms of just the synergy between the radio show and the podcast.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. Now, real quick, I want to ask, just, you've been in radio for decades now. People say, oh, radio's changed so much. In your eyes, how has radio, particularly the DJing aspect, the curating music, how has that changed over your career?
Well, when I first started in radio, was right out of high school in '83. The whole reason why I started was to share music I loved with other people, to get the word out, to take music I love on vinyl or CD or whatever format at the time, and be able to put it on the air and share it with others. That was always the number one thing for me. That was the number one driver. And it was a big wake-up call and a big shock as a kid starting out when I learned that DJs really didn't have anything to do with what they played. They were told what to play. And that was a deal breaker for me, because that really that was against the whole reason why I got into it and wanted to do it. So I had started talking to my local rock station in New Jersey and said, hey, will you let me do my own show, play what I want to play? And they said to me they would, but I would have to do it just a couple hours a week, late at night on Fridays. But I didn't care. I mean, I didn't care what the money was, the shift was. I didn't care. I just wanted the creative freedom. And that was a goal and something I set and established for myself really early on in my career. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, it definitely took way longer to make decent money and to get decent hours. But the trade-off was well worth it, because it built me an audience. It built me people that were coming to me for me and what I had to say and what I had to play. And to me, that was the utmost important thing, and still is. So that establishing that precedent really early on made me unique and different to everybody else that was on the radio. And it still does to some degree. And it's something that's really important. So when you talk about the changes in radio, there have been a ton of them, obviously. But one of the things that didn't really change all that much for me was me having my own voice and doing what I've always wanted to do. Now, the restrictions are 1,000 times greater in terms of DJs having any ability to play what they want or even say what they want. Back when I started, there was a human being on 24/7 at every radio station. Now, outside of major markets, you may not have a human being in the building outside of maybe one shift, if that. So the differences in what technology has brought is enormous in radio. And I could talk about that, but in terms of how it affected me personally, it really didn't, because I set about building my own thing from day one. And that's what people have always come to me for and still do. And that's what it became known for. So that was a really important thing that I did really early on that served me well in just helping to build an audience and be known for something.
Yeah, and when I listen to you, it's really inspiring too. My first job, I was 17. I worked at a 100,000 watt country station in Southeast Missouri, and I was always eager to get on the air. I wasn't very good, but I was always eager to get on the air, and then listening to just how you have that personality that it's missing today from so many places, that I think, like you said, you've built that, and Sirius XM gives you that that capability to just expand on that, and you take listener calls and get to give your opinion. I think that's super important, especially in this environment that we're in today.
Yeah, the thing is that there are a lot of other people that are probably broadcasters that would love to give opinion, that would love to take calls, that would love to talk to somebody, talk to the audience for 20 minutes between records, that would love to play what they want and say what they want. But they're just not able to do it. They would lose their job if they did. And look, I mean, there's a lot worse things you could be doing for a living than playing records and back selling records and making a living. I mean, most people would sign on for that in a minute, and that's great. But for me, it was always about that back and forth. When I started in satellite radio, which was in 2000, and I started on XM when they were two separate companies. And they said to me, I'll never forget, they sat me down in front of this computer console in a studio, and they said, okay, here's what you do. You load up the computer. There's these little dots every fifth song. That's where you can talk for 30 seconds and then record the next one, and you can record your whole week in an hour. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I actually want to be on the air. I want to do a live show. And they're like, a live show? They're like, in 4 or 5 hours, you could do a whole week. And I said, can I take calls? Well, no. Can I give stuff away? No. Can I do extended interviews? Can I take requests? Can I truly connect with the audience? And the answer down the line was no. And I said, well, that's what I do. That's what I want to do. And, I could have been on back then, right out of the gate every day of the week if I recorded stuff. But because I was insistent on doing a live show, because they were only going to pay me a certain amount for a certain amount of hours, I was relegated to doing one show a week for the longest time. But it didn't matter to me because that one show a week built an immediate audience because it was so different to everything else around it. And that's a really, really important thing. So it's just something I've been very passionate about. It's not to say that I would never, ever not do regular format if I needed to, and I have in my career, I've done the regular format with no problem, what the program director wants executed. But at the end of the day, I've been doing this so long, I think people at this point want me for me and the audience I bring. And if I'm not being me, then the audience isn't going to be there. So that's definitely something that I took a really long time, my whole life, to build up.
Fantastic.
Right.
Getting to kind of current events, but also a little bit of your history. This pandemic, with everything shutting down, all the concerts shutting down for a year, there's really been no equivalent to it. But the other sort of time where entertainment was put on the back burner that I can think of, and you being you originating out of Jersey and New York would understand when I say 9/11, when entertainment was really, really shut down. Are you seeing, in the beginning, did you see any parallels between how these promoters and bands handled the pandemic to how they handled 9/11 20 years ago? Or is that a correlation that the media made that is just not true whatsoever?
Yeah, I don't really see a connection because I think with 9/11, as tragic as that was, people knew that eventually the city was going to recover, people would move on, things would get back to normal at some point in terms of just people wanting to go to the city and go to shows and what have you. So I think there's a big difference there. With the pandemic, people just didn't know, people still don't know as far as testing, what things are going to look like when they reopen, what restrictions are going to be. You're dealing with very, very different things with this a virus that's causing people to be sick or tragically die versus what you hope was a one-time catastrophic event and a terrorist attack. So they're different things in that regard. I mean, I do remember that when 9/11 happened, there was a list of songs that were put out by the radio ownership groups at that time. And they were like, don't play this or don't play these artists or these songs because they could be viewed as being, I don't know, inflammatory or something, or insensitive to what was going on. And to no surprise, a lot of the songs on there were hard rock and metal songs. And I never agreed with that list, and I didn't follow it because my feeling about it is like music is a great escape and it's a healer and it makes people feel really good about things usually and gets them away from their problems. And I know that having at that time of 9/11 doing a weekly metal show on the radio in New York City, I knew that a lot of that music that was on that band list is stuff that was requested by firefighters and cops and EMT workers. So I'm like, I'm not going to tell them they can't hear it because somebody decided this isn't appropriate. So I never adhered to that stuff. That was the one thing I do remember about the impact of the radio stuff with 9/11. I mean, also at that time, a lot of radio stations, at least for a couple of weeks afterwards, went to 24/7 news. They disrupted their format. So it was a very different thing. But in terms of the impact on shows, I think then people knew eventually the city would recover. People would want to start coming back to concerts and coming back to shows. The venues would reopen. Dealing with the pandemic, it was just like unlike anything anybody ever saw, and we're still trying to navigate the reopenings.
Yeah, and I know that this morning, the Hollywood Bowl announced its slew of reopenings with its shows coming, and then Vegas has announced a bunch. In fact, Matt and I are headed there in July.
And I know
We
you
actually have
love Vegas.
tickets to,
Yeah.
we actually have tickets to see Garth Brooks, and it is a full capacity show. And Matt has a theory that Vegas is like going to be like the catalyst for everything to open back up and kind of see how that goes. As of we're recording this today, I'm fully vaccinated. He is. I know you've gotten yours. Do you see Vegas maybe being that catalyst of how people are going to look and see how their tours can continue?
Yeah, I mean, I am a big fan of that city, and I've always loved it there. I recently bought a place there that I'm going to have part-time starting next month, so I'm looking forward to spending a lot more time there. And it is, it is the entertainment capital. I mean, everything rolls through there in terms of shows and entertainment and people. The city seems to be back all the way in terms of gambling and just hotel attendance. I think a lot of that is driven by people driving from California, where things have been so restricted, and then being able to get there and blow off some steam and be able to see shows and do what they want to do. So I don't know how much it's good. I think a lot of people will look at it as a little bit of a test case, but you also have other parts of the country that are doing that now too. I mean, Texas has been having full capacity sporting events and will potentially have full capacity concerts. I was just in Texas a couple weeks ago, and I did a public event, and it was packed, and there was not a person around wearing a mask. So
Wow.
there's a very, very different thing going on in Texas and Oklahoma and Florida and other parts of the country. Where you land on that is, personal choice and how you feel about it. But the reality is there are some places that never really closed in this country. And that's been a bit of a challenge for me, being on the radio, doing a live national broadcast, because over the last year and change, I've been covering this as best I can and talking about the various impacts of this. But I may have a caller listening in Texas or Arkansas and be like, what's this guy talking about? I mean, we're still going to shows every weekend. We're in clubs, we're in bars, there's no masks. And then you could have somebody listening in LA or New York and be in a worse lockdown than I am. So it's very, very different in different places. But I do think that Vegas is going to be a really big test case for a lot of people. The beauty of it is you can do residencies there where people will come to you versus you not having to tour. So I think that's really attractive to a lot of artists. And we'll see how it all goes. But I think it's going to be a lot of people watching what others are doing and making their own assessments of what's best for their area.
Right. I'll just ask it plainly. Your prediction as somebody who's been watching this very, very closely. Do you see something like a stadium show happening in July in an area that is as reopened as Vegas? Do you think that we'll be able to get the 50, 70,000 people in there and do it? Or do you think it's going to get pushed again?
Are you talking about the Motley Def Leppard thing, or just a stadium level show in general?
Garth in general. Do you see he's aiming for July? Garth specifically, I should say, he's aiming for July, Allegiant Stadium, full capacity with the rate of reopening. Do you think we'll see that or no?
It's tough to say because I'm not sure what Vegas is thinking. I don't know what their governor and the restrictions and the timeline that they're having there. I think that if the numbers stay low and things stay in check there and the vaccines continue to roll and people get them, then yeah, I mean, I think that absolutely could happen there. If there's a big flare up in Vegas and there's an outbreak and we have a whole setback there, then that's going to set everything back tremendously. Yeah. But I think the last few weeks and leading into that show in July, I think will be a really big test, because the casinos are wide open right now and pretty full in Vegas, and the hotels are at capacity. So if you've got jam-packed casino floors and the strip is packed and people walking around there and you're not having any sort of outbreak, I don't see why it would be measurably worse in a full capacity concert at that level. So I could see it happening. I don't know if there's a retractable roof on that stadium or not. I think it's actually permanently covered. I don't know if they open the roof, but if they can open
Yeah.
the roof, that would help to bring some air in. But then again, July in Vegas is awfully hot. So there's that consideration too.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think everything here is trial and error, but trying to do a stadium level show in one place as a one-off with a solo artist like Garth Brooks, way easier than trying to route a tour right now because of the different restrictions in every state.
Right.
He's actually got, as you can tell, we're big country fans and rock fans, but he actually did break Ticketmaster's record for Salt Lake City. That sold out in less than 30 minutes, and that is the following week. So he's actually got like 3, maybe 4 shows coming up in July that they're kicking it back off. But we actually spoke with Rick Allen from Def Leppard yesterday, and he said, that's still kind of up in the air for the stadium tour with Motley Crue. But he also made reference, just like you have on your show, that it's not up to the bands, it's up to the promoters and the legalities that correspond with the local ordinances.
Well, I love Rick and he's a friend, as are all the guys in Leopard and Motley. But as we sit here on May 11th, with that tour scheduled to start next month, I can tell you that they should and would know if that tour was going to start next month. So he probably has to play his cards a little close to the vest.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there's a person on the planet that expects that tour to start as scheduled. But the promoters want to continue to sell the tickets because they will eventually move that somewhere down the line. And it eventually will happen. And the whole idea is getting your money and holding it and getting you to make the commitment to buy the ticket. That's why so many of these tours that did cancel last year, including the stadium tour, they didn't call it until like a day or two before, because they want to sell tickets. They want to hold your money. They want to make interest on it, they being the promoter. Now, as far as the bands are concerned, look, if a band is going to go out on tour at that level to play a show that big, you've got to have staging and production and lights and crew and routing done way in advance than a month out. So I think all of these bands know exactly what's going on, and they probably have to pump out there the line of like, well, we'll see. But the reality is, I think they know, and I certainly know the promoter knows, that the viability of a tour, because again, a show and a tour are very different things. And that's sometimes something fans don't understand, because a fan only cares about the show playing in their city. But if it's a tour and there's 4 other shows that week, that's all impacted. And as we all know, every state has different restrictions. So that makes a tour challenging. And the last thing on this is, you can't do a big tour at reduced capacity.
No.
The math doesn't work. You can't have a tour that maybe you had sold 35,000 tickets for and go tell 10,000 people, no, you have a ticket, but you can't come.
Right.
You can't cut the income from all those tickets out and then go to the bands and say, hey, will you take less money? The answer is going to be no. So
Live Nation tried it. Live Nation
doesn't
tried
work.
it. Yeah. I said this to Buddy the other day. I think we were doing our wrap for the Def Leppard episode. And I said, I never imagined, because I cover shows on the East Coast. My butt's in a seat every weekend in normal times. And I said, I never imagined we'd be in a position where you just couldn't go do that. What have we learned or throughout this, or what have you learned specifically about taking the ability to see these incredible artists in person live and not taking that for granted?
Well, it's a big part of what I do, obviously. Right. So there's 2 sides to it. From a fan standpoint, if I'm being totally honest, I've been going to shows for over 40 years.
Yeah.
I could go to a show every night of the week if I wanted to. I've backed down from doing that as I've gotten older, because it's just too much. There's a million bands constantly on the road, constantly touring. So I've gotten more selective anyway about the shows that I've gone to, unless I'm working in there in a working capacity. because that's the other thing too. So many times I'm at shows and I see bands and I have to be there. So if I'm a fan of the band, I get to see them and I'm there working. So for me, it's a little bit of a different answer just because it's what I do for a living. But that being said, there's bands that have released great new records in the last year or two that I love that I really wish I could have seen play live. Soul Asylum comes to mind. I love that band. They're one of my favorite live bands to see. They made a great record last year. Haven't been able to see them. This year, The Pretty Reckless made what I think is my album of the year so far. Would love to see them. They're not going to tour till next year. So for those bands that I don't see all that often, that's something I definitely miss and want to come back just from the fan standpoint. From the business standpoint, for me, I mean, I talk about music every day live on the radio. So not having those shows, not having the fans, not having shows to call in and say, hey, I saw this band, I saw that band. That has definitely changed things dramatically as well. So I've missed it for different reasons. And there's some aspects of it I didn't miss because I do also believe that just before everything went down, I do believe that there were a lot of bands that were over touring and playing way too much. And I think starting to really damage their draw and their interest level because they overplayed. So I do think that for some of those bands, this will be a bit of a unexpected help because it kind of cleanses the whole system out.
I'm going to ask something that I know in your world is probably sacrilegious to ask, but would you say that Kiss was one of those bands? I mean, after a while, the whole farewell tour thing can kind of get a little gimmicky, and unless I'm horribly mistaken, I don't follow them all that much. They've done that once or twice before. Do you think is Kiss one of those bands, or do you think they've handled it right?
Well, they have. I mean, they have absolutely played on this farewell card. Which is the second time around they're playing a farewell card. To the hilt. Obviously, they did announce a last ever show that they claim, which take that for what it's worth, but that obviously is going to end up getting moved because everything got pushed down timeline wise. The thing about Kiss is that thing, and whether you like it or not, or however you feel about Kiss, that was running out of steam. And that was running out of steam very visibly. All you got to do is look at ticket counts on the last leg or two of that tour. I know people that went. I personally don't go see them anymore, but I know people who did. And all you got to do is look at the seating charts, and they were closing off upper levels and cutting down venues and not coming near selling out at most of the shows. I don't think that was so much of a byproduct of over touring. Maybe it was, but I just think that there's no new music. There was nothing to get people overly excited about it. It was the same show every night. They continued to put out there the possibility that they would celebrate the end of the band with two original members, Ace and Peter. Everyone knew that wasn't happening. They never made a formal offer to them to do that. So they dangled a lot of carrots out there to get people interested in this. And I think initially there was a lot of interest. And then as it continued to go on and go through other cities and go through bigger markets and smaller markets, people are just like, there's so many other options. We saw it once, we get it. We know nothing's happening special outside of the same show every night. And I think it just kind of outside of the hardcore fans sort of winded down a little bit. Now they're going to go back out again as soon as they can. Will there be enhanced interest because people couldn't have seen them for the last year? Maybe. Or it could be that so many other bands are now going to be out on the road that it's going to be like, oh, the farewell tour yet still again with the same show. Who cares? I don't know. It could go either way.
It's going to be interesting. I'll say this, and then, Buddy, I know you have a question, but it's going to be really, really interesting to watch because, again, Garth is kind of our barometer. He's kind of our center point to watch when things happen. That stadium show, 50,000 people, 30 minutes, unprecedented. This desire to go out is a pressure cooker, and I think you're going to see a lot of demand for a lot of different bands, and maybe there won't be the shelf space, so to speak, the arena space to accommodate them all. Buddy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there's one artist that you haven't seen yet that you want to see, or maybe that time has passed.
In my life, you mean?
Yes.
Uh, wow.
Buddy, I think you just stumped the trunk.
I didn't mean to. I really didn't mean to.
No, I mean, well, I'm trying to think of who I never saw that I always wanted to see that can still be seen, that's still active.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anybody that fits that category. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of people that are deceased that I would love to have been able to say I saw, but obviously that's not possible. So as far as bands that are still active that I never saw that I always wanted to see off the top of my head, no, I can't think of anybody. But I do think that when tours start up and shows start up, all of these bands are going to get an immediate hit of people feeling the way we're talking about. Like, oh my
Yeah.
God, I thought they'd be gone forever. And I just want that experience one more time, and I'm going to really savor it. So I think every band's going to benefit from that. But the difference is that's going to turn really quickly, because when the floodgates open, then all of a sudden everybody's going to realize, wait a minute, I can see every band every night. They're all out there, and they're going to have to prioritize because people don't have endless time and endless money. So I think these bands that are trying to get out and get tickets on sale now, even if the show's not till October, November, they're trying to get ahead of the wave that's coming, because people just don't have endless money to spend, especially coming off of the last year or so. So there's a lot of different angles to this. And as it folds out, as it rolls out and we navigate it, it's going to be really interesting to see what sinks and swims.
Yeah, I know we've got more. Concerts are just rolling out daily, it seems, in the last week or two, and I know more are coming. Eddie, we want to be respectful of your time. I know there's so much more we could get to, like your TV work, your advocacy for rock and roll, but we just appreciate you taking time with us. We're going to keep listening to the show, and we're excited that you joined us today.
And as these things keep rolling out, we hope to have you back in the future to talk about it. This was a true pleasure. Thank you very much, Eddie.
Well, thank you, Matt, buddy. Pleasure to meet you both. Thank you for having me, and best of luck to you. And yeah, hopefully we're past. Hopefully the next time we talk, all this pandemic stuff and wondering about shows and how they're going to happen won't even be a topic, because we'll be 100% back to normal. That's, I think, what we all hope for, and hopefully that's the case sooner than later.
Yeah, and hopefully I'm in Bakersfield, so hopefully I can get down to one of your LA invasions at some point when you're back out here.
Yeah, I hope they come back soon. I'm waiting on the company, and hopefully that does indeed happen. So fingers crossed, we'll be back to all that sort of stuff again soon. So hopefully meet you one of these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, brother, and keep rocking out there.
Thanks, guys. You too. Take care.
I didn't mean to sound worried there when you said stump the trunk. It was something I kind of brought up to you at the beginning before we got on. I said, let's not play that game, because I'm sure he gets that all the time on his show.
There's a difference between playing the game and asking different questions, asking good questions. All we did was ask good questions. I think they were good questions. I think they were different, and it really gave him, and it really gave him the opportunity to talk about something a little different. And,
Right.
I like his point, because, I am just waiting for this to happen. I cannot wait. Let me suck in my gut there. I've got the strip on my belly.
Well, that happens to you more often than not. Not the belly sucking. I'm talking about the Vegas trips. You go there quite often.
Well, I do, but I hadn't even thought about what he had said with regard to, a Vegas show being a one-off, as opposed to routing a tour. And that's right. It is really difficult, because the reference of Texas, the Billy Bob's has been having shows since freaking January.
Yeah.
But Vegas just started within the last 3 weeks, putting shows back that weren't just the residency shows at the 250 capacities that are their loss leaders anyway. Vegas really has just started having those for-profit concerts come back.
Right.
So, and it's really interesting, because that means Garth's tour isn't really a tour. It's a series of one-offs that they kind of just pack up and go do. And I think that system, even though they weren't planning for the pandemic, I think that system is going to bode well for them post-pandemic, because they can go to areas where things are more open than not and wait out the other areas. He says the tour has to wrap by the end of this year. It's not going to, and I know him, he's not going to do that to his fans. So
Yeah, I mean, there's dates scheduled through next summer, I believe he actually said. But like Eddie was saying too, like you can't do a stadium tour at half capacity, at 3/4, or anything, because you're alienating fans who've already paid for those shows. Or
right.
maybe they haven't paid, maybe they haven't announced it and they're trying to do a stadium tour. But there's a lot of overhead involved that just the fans don't realize are required in order to put on these shows. And you can't operate at anything less than full capacity when you're expecting to play to 70,000 fans. You can't play to 50,000 when you
Sure.
know you can pack 70 in there. And that's exactly what's going to happen. But yeah, more concerts are being announced, more tours are being announced. I think what we're going to learn too is how they're going to handle vaccinated versus non-vaccinated patrons. And the Hollywood Bowl actually is one of the first to come out and actually say how they're going to do that. They're going to have a couple of sections designated to non-vaccinated fans, but you're going to have to provide a proof of a negative test within the 72 hours of attending that show. You're going to have to do that. They're not going to do that at the gate.
Well, we can get into that on my other show.
But just saying, there's those new things that you have to encounter at this point as we move forward and we get going. And
Anything to get my butt back in the seat. The mayor of DC announced that capacity restrictions will be lifted within the next 10 days, and that by June 11th, entertainment venues can be at 100% capacity. I live literally, and I know when I say this, you think, oh, you're close. No, I can see, if I go to my roof, I can see the arena from my building. I am 3
Oh, wow.
blocks from my arena. So I am waiting for the day where I have a ticket to go to a concert at Cap One Arena here in DC, and I'm just steps away. I can walk to the show and I can walk home. I'm really, really excited for that day. And that day seems to be in closer reach than I think anybody anticipated, because, not to get too newsy, but the way this is happening is a little bit more sudden, almost said southern, we talk a lot about Texas, sudden than anybody else has thought. It's been, oh, capacity is lifted this, and you can be 100% by then. Capacity here, capacity that, and then the mask mandates are going to be based on vaccination percentages, and we're going. We're headed there. We're headed there.
I think a lot of the restrictions are being lifted for political reasons that we'll get to on your other show, but as well. But yes, I'm glad to see we're moving in that direction. The only concern I have, I guess, is if it is an outdoor show, some places like the Hollywood Bowl are still requiring masks no matter what. I think as time progresses, that will be lifted, because they're just right now trying to just reopen. And if that's what they have to enforce in order to reopen, then that's what they have to enforce at this point. But I think as the year progresses, we're already into almost mid-May at this point. I think we're going to see those restrictions lifted more, and more tours, probably come around next year more so, as Eddie even said. Summer planning for next year, as we've already said as well. So I think we're getting there.
Wonderful. Well, for the Music Universe podcast, I'm Matt.
And Buddy, thanks for listening or watching. If you're on socials, keep checking us out at themusicuniverse.com for the latest news, reviews, and more. And subscribe. Hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening or watching. And you can check us out at tmupod.com as well, and get linked to all the channels. Thank you and take care.